The heavy restaurant door opened, and a frowning man ran outside, holding a woman's hand. It was clear from their sad faces that their mood was ruined. "We will never come to this restaurant again." He was indignant. It used to be one of the best restaurants in the city, but now it's a horrible place. The food is disgusting, and the service is terrible. And they also put a strip pole there. Apparently the new restaurant management decided to change the restaurant's concept and ruined it. The disgruntled man helped the girl into a luxury car, quickly got into the driver's seat, and hit the gas pedal, promising that he would never come here again. The restaurant manager, Frank, a tall guy, about 25 years old, looked puzzled as the couple drove away. The restaurant had lost almost all of its regular customers in the last 2 months. The restaurant had been in trouble ever since the new owner started running it. The new owner decided to set new rules, and after that many employees, including an experienced chef, Daniel, decided to quit. But a new silly owner wasn't confused by this. On the contrary, it inspired him to make even more changes. A potty lover decided to turn a well-known high-end restaurant into a nightclub. After that, the restaurant began to lose profits, resulting in reduced salaries for employees, and everyone began to quit. The employees who worked with the previous owner quit and were hired in other restaurants. They were replaced by people of dubious appearance and reputation. Only Frank and the cook, Lionel, who was now in charge of the entire kitchen, remained from the former team. The manager turned around and with a heavy sigh headed for the owner's office. Frank realized that they needed to do something immediately, otherwise the restaurant would go bankrupt. The new owner was Paul, a handsome guy, almost the same age as the manager. He was sitting in a leather armchair, with his feet up on a desk full of papers. He had been trying to understand them for weeks, but in reality, he was just throwing paper balls into the wastebasket. He wasn't interested in all that paperwork with numbers, tables, and scientific terms. A few months ago, he had suddenly become a widower. Paul had hoped his late wife's restaurant would help him improve his financial situation, but it had only added more problems and headaches. How did Kathleen deal with such complex business? He wondered. Paul used to think that the owner's job was to come to the office once in a while, reminding employees who is the boss and collecting the proceeds. But it turned out to be not so simple. The restaurant business has its peculiarities and difficulties. It is important to understand all aspects of it, to keep your team disciplined, to control your suppliers, and to keep up to date with the latest developments in the business. A good restaurant must always develop. It must update the menu, dishes, interior, and entertainment program for guests, or it will cease to exist. But it all seemed boring to the young widower. It was only now that he realized what a tremendous job his wife was doing. Paul frowned and looked up at the ceiling, thinking back to the day Kathleen had died in a car accident. Her car had fallen off a bridge. Her body was never found, but there was a very fast river current, and the investigator didn't even doubt about the girl's death. His wife had no relatives left. Her father died before their marriage, having had time only to bless the couple, and they had only been married for about a year and a half. Most of their married life they only quarreled, and before the girl's death, their relationship had completely ruined. His wife was constantly busy at work and was unwilling to participate in the carefree life of her chosen one. He hoped that she would support his desire to have fun and enjoy life as much as possible. Paul often persuaded her to leave everything and move abroad, to the coast, where they could spend the whole day sitting with a cocktail in a lounge chair under a palm tree. But Kathleen said that she intends to develop her father's business, and the money inherited from him should be invested in her business, not wasted on a carefree life. At first, he restrained his desires so that his future wife's dad would like him, then so as not to mess up his relationship with his conservative wife. But he no longer wanted to live the way a hard-working family lived. Paul didn't understand why they had to work hard when they had money and a business that generated a good income. However, soon his wife began to tell him that he also had to work. The guy didn't like this situation, and he just started going to clubs and parties to spend less time at home. Soon he started to spend time with girls with dubious reputations. He had fun to the fullest. But one day, Kathleen came to the nightclub and found him literally in the arms of a half-naked girl, put him in her car, and said angrily, "I'm not going to tolerate this any longer. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." But Paul only cheekily asked with a smile, "Okay, let's get a divorce. How will we divide your daddy's inheritance?" The girl looked at him and said in a calm tone, "No, Paul. After the divorce, you will be left with nothing, just as you were before we got married. You have earned nothing. If you like living like that, go ahead, but not at my expense." At that moment, Paul realized that she was right. Without her, he would have no money at all. This idea helped the guy sober up instantly, and he immediately started begging for his wife's forgiveness. After that, the man calmed down for a while, pretending to come to his senses and even pretending to look for a job. Kathleen looked at her husband incredulously, but didn't talk about divorce anymore. She even decided to help him get a job. And then that accident happened. At the moment when the police officers called Paul and told him terrible news of his wife's death, he had contradictory feelings. At first, he felt a sense of relief, because now no one would tell him what to do. Now he is an independent man, a rich and happy widower. But the death of his wife also upset him. Justifying his behavior by the death of his wife, he started drinking alcohol again and returned to his former carefree life. In the nightclub, Paul met a pretty girl, Lauren. He had already tried to flirt with her before, but his wife prevented him from doing so. Besides, Lauren didn't want to date a married man. The guy felt that she was not an ordinary girl. He found out that she was the daughter of a local high-ranking official. And then Paul decided to marry her to get even more benefits than from his previous marriage. He tried very hard to charm this special girl and make a positive impression on her father, who had a lot of powerful connections with boundless opportunities. Now, the guy realized that he could not make any mistake. Paul pretended to be a successful businessman, a grieving widower in need of warm family relations. Lauren gladly took on the role of savior of the poor guy and soon agreed to marry him. But at that time, problems began to arise in the restaurant. The brilliant idea of turning the restaurant into a club did not have the expected effect. Everything turned out the other way around. But Paul needed the money now. The wedding was a month and a half away. He couldn't let Lauren's father suspect anything. It was important to maintain the image of a serious, successful businessman. Frank knocked timidly on the door and walked in. He looked frustrated. "Paul, I can't take this anymore. I'm quitting," he announced in a disappointed voice. Paul took his feet off the desk and looked at Frank intently. He couldn't lose an employee who knew how to run a restaurant and was willing to work for a meager salary. Paul realized that he certainly couldn't handle the business alone and was unlikely to find another employee. "Frank, what's wrong?" Paul asked, pretending to be worried. "Customers are constantly leaving the restaurant," the manager complained. "They don't like the new concept of the restaurant. They say that the food in our restaurant is not as good as before, and the service is terrible. But the problem is that almost all the kitchen staff quit. Now only Lionel is working in the kitchen, but he can't cope with everything." Paul was preparing for a wedding and didn't want to deal with these problems. But since he was the owner, he was obliged to do something to prevent bankruptcy. "What should I do? Tell me." The manager scratched his head and said hesitantly, "We have to increase the staff's salaries." "That's impossible," the manager replied with a frown. "When our club becomes popular and starts making a good profit, then I promise to pay bonuses to all employees." "Well, then at least we need to hire a food taster and an assistant for the chef. Otherwise, even Lionel will quit. If he decides to quit, we'll have to feed our guests frozen semi-finished products. Where am I going to find those employees now?" Paul asked in a disgruntled tone. He sighed heavily and fell silent for a minute. He couldn't lose the restaurant's only chef. Moreover, He had praised his successful restaurant so much in front of the fiancé's father that they decided to celebrate the wedding right here. Suddenly, Paul came up with a new brilliant idea. "Let's go," the restaurant owner said and rushed to the exit. There, Paul looked around, but there were hardly any people around. The man resolutely approached the girls passing by and asked, "Hello, would you like to work in this restaurant?" The girls looked at him suspiciously and hurried away. But Paul had already noticed a homeless girl sitting on a bench wrapped in an old blanket and shouted to her, "Hello, beauty, come here." The manager whispered fearfully, "Paul, I hope it's a joke." But Paul was unstoppable, for he always liked to make impulsive decisions. "No, I'm not kidding. This girl will be both a chef's assistant and a food taster, and she will only get one salary for two positions." The restaurant owner thought, "Are you willing to work in this restaurant?" Paul even thought he could improve his reputation by telling his fiancée and her father that he helps homeless people. Lauren was very respectful of those who did charity work. "Yes, I'd be happy to get any job here." The girl agreed unexpectedly. The manager turned away, not hiding his displeasure. Inside the restaurant, the girl took off her tattered blanket and an old coat, and they saw a girl almost the same age as them, with a short haircut and a pretty face. Her hands were clean, her clothes were clean, and there was no unpleasant odor from her. The guys immediately noticed her large belly. The girl was pregnant. Paul immediately burst out laughing and said, "Well, I wanted to hire one employee, but I got two. I'm so lucky." The girl didn't say anything but looked at her new boss calmly. Lionel, a big tall guy wearing eyeglasses, looked at his new subordinate with a heavy sigh. But there was no choice. He had to get to work. Maybe this homeless girl can at least chop vegetables. "Good afternoon. My name is Lionel. I'm the chef of this restaurant." He introduced himself kindly. "And my name is Alice," the girl replied quietly, looking at the tall guy in the chef's uniform. But they didn't get a chance to talk. Their conversation was interrupted by the waiter who voiced the order of the customers: 2 schnitzel and 2 salads. Lionel got nervous and started pulling ingredients out of the refrigerator. He was scaring both himself and Alice with his chaotic, awkward movements. He tried to do several things at once, but it caused him to drop the food on the floor, then pull new ingredients out of the refrigerator, and eventually forget what he had done before. Alice watched him silently at first, and then she carefully made a ponytail, washed her hands, and began to quickly chop the ingredients. The chef was about to scold her for interfering in the cooking process, but suddenly he realized that she was doing everything right, and it would really speed things up. "Thank you," he muttered, roasting meat in a pan. At that moment, a waitress and a bartender entered the kitchen. They were laughing loudly at some joke, not caring that the customers could hear them. The restaurant staff didn't care about the reputation of the restaurant. When they saw the new employee, they looked at each other and laughed even louder. The bartender, with freckles on his face, spoke through laughter. "I thought Frank was joking, but this girl really works here now. Our boss has come up with another brilliant idea that will bring us one step closer to bankruptcy." The waitress echoed, "Where did you come from?" "From what dumpster?" The new employee didn't have enough money for new clothes, but she was well-mannered, and ignoring the mockery, she started peeling vegetables. They laughed some more, but when they saw no reaction, they left the kitchen. Lionel looked at the assistant sympathetically and blamed himself for not being able to stand up for her. "Just ignore them. They do that to everyone," the chef said. "They used to mock me too. Sometimes they still mess with me." "I don't really care," she replied calmly. "But why do you let them treat you like that? You're a chef. Am I a chef? Look at me," the guy exclaimed and blushed. "Everything constantly falls out of my hands. I'm a loser, not a chef." He scolded himself. "You know, when I cook at home, I make culinary masterpieces suitable for a Michelin star." He continued to talk. "But when I'm at work, everything is haste. He talked about his feelings for the first time. He had known this girl for no more than an hour, but for some reason, he began to trust her immediately. Such a heartfelt story touched Alice's heart. She wanted to comfort this awkward and shy, but nice guy and help him, at least with advice. "You're too nervous and simply don't know how to organize your work process properly," she explained. "Just try to relax and understand that it depends on you whether the customer will come back to this restaurant or not." The girl looked with a smile at the guy, who was listening to her with his mouth open. And suddenly she walked to the kitchen door, opened it slightly, and whispered, "Look," she said, pointing to the guests at the window. "That's the couple you are cooking for right now." And now he has taken his girlfriend's hand and is saying something to her. "I think he's saying words of love to her. They're very nice, aren't they?" she asked, looking at Lionel. "They are your guests. They could have stopped by the burger place, or they could have just stayed home and ordered pizza. But they came to your restaurant, Lionel. Do you want to give them a gastronomic delight so they'll remember this beautiful evening for a long time?" The guy looked intently at the couple. It was the first time he had ever looked at his work from that angle. Alice pointed at the food waiting to be served and suggested to the chef, "Lionel, imagine you're an artist and you're about to create a brilliant canvas, and I'm going to hand you the brushes and mix the paints." The chef liked such a metaphor. He ceased to be nervous. In his eyes sparkled with creative inspiration. With quick and precise movements he made salad and decorated plates with meat. For a moment, time and space ceased to exist for him. Alice admired the enthusiastic expression on his face. After the waiter had carefully delivered the culinary masterpieces to the customers, Lionel approached the door 2 more times to watch his guests' reactions to the meals he had worked so hard to cook. He returned to his workplace satisfied and happy. Now he was not afraid of any new order. His fear disappeared suddenly and without a trace. The guy was overflowing with the desire to create and share his creative energy with people. That evening, satisfied waiters, who received generous tips, looked at the chef with respect and told him the words of gratitude from customers. Since that day, Lionel didn't have to worry anymore. Now he was happy to go to work, where a fragile, kind girl was waiting for him at the entrance to the kitchen with a gentle smile. The new employee quickly made friends with the staff. Her presence unexpectedly changed the atmosphere in the team. Lionel and Alice became friends, and one day, he dared to tell the girl a sad story from his childhood, which affected his personality. When he was 11, his father left them for another woman, and soon he had another son. The sensitive child was sure that his father did that because his son was not good enough, so his father chose another child. He lived with this idea for several years. Apparently, that's why he developed insecurity and low self-esteem. "I don't remember my dad at all. I've lived with my mom all my life," Alice confessed unexpectedly. Lionel bit his lower lip nervously and dared to ask the question that had tormented him for a long time. "How did you end up homeless?" Alice flinched, turned away, and then suddenly said, "Oh, I lost track of time. I still have a lot to do." Realizing that the girl didn't want to answer that question, the guy decided not to insist. It's probably a very sensitive topic for her, just like her pregnancy. If she wants to, she'll tell me everything herself, Lionel thought. This mysterious assistant had a positive effect on the young chef. The newly gained confidence in his own skills changed the attitude of the whole team. Now co-workers and customers looked at Lionel in a completely different way. But the guy knew who he should be grateful to. Sometimes he looked at his assistant and realized that he admired her like a man in love. He didn't care about the girl's old, tattered clothes, and even the fact that she was pregnant could not ruin his warm feelings. Only Paul wasn't happy with the positive changes in the restaurant. Now this strange girl annoyed him for some reason. For example, today Paul looked with displeasure at a formerly homeless girl who was calmly chopping greens in the kitchen. "Why does it take you so long to chop greens?" he yelled at her. "There's a wet floor by the sink. Wipe it up immediately or you'll sleep and fall there yourself." he muttered. The girl obediently took a rag and wiped the drops of water from the floor. Her obedience irritated the young businessman even more. Passing by her, he couldn't help but yell at her. But recently his beloved Lauren had sincerely praised his noble deed, so it would be foolish to fire this girl now. Alice annoyed him for some reason, but he couldn't explain this sudden hostility. However, there might have been one reason. This pregnant homeless girl reminded the guy of his dead wife, either in appearance or in her movements. He even realized that sometimes he deliberately mocked and humiliated the new employee, imagining his ex-wife. He wanted revenge for the time he was forced to live by her rules. Alice was doing well in the kitchen, and customers were now praising the restaurant's chef. But Alice's outward resemblance to his ex-wife made him angry. Well, that's okay. After the wedding I can fire Frank, Lionel and Alice. I'll sell the restaurant and forget this nightmare. I deserve better. Thinking about the new opportunities after the wedding, Paul smiled. The girl's father shared a secret that he was preparing a surprise for the newlyweds. A big wedding trip abroad. There Paul will persuade Lauren to do something that Kathleen refused to do. Lauren had a completely different personality, and Paul knew that if he promised her eternal love, Lauren would agree to anything. They will live abroad and her father will pay for their beautiful life. Alice walked out of the kitchen into the corridor and noticed a strange man with a leather bag in his hand. She had seen him before. His gaze made her uncomfortable every time. He came to Paul's office about twice a week, but no one knew who it was. I don't know who that person is, Lionel answered indifferently. Maybe it's a wedding planner, but that's none of our business. Alice disagreed with him. I don't think a person with such a strange appearance would be involved in organizing celebrations. The wedding day came. Paul spent the last of his money to maintain his reputation as a successful businessman in front of his future in-laws. He hired a designer to decorate the restaurant, and 3 more chefs for the party. Hired a wedding planner and a DJ, and ordered a huge cake. The wedding celebration was going great. The happy bride tenderly embraced the groom. Her father was sipping expensive wine and looking at the couple with a smile, and the guests were having fun, rejoicing at the creation of a new family and the opportunity to eat delicious food. Suddenly, Alice entered the restaurant. Guests were having fun, and no one paid attention to her until she stepped up on stage and took the microphone in her hands. Dear guests, I have something to tell you, the girl said in a calm voice. Paul was surprised, blushed, and said rudely, What are you doing here? You should be in the kitchen. Go to the kitchen. Now, Paul. Wait, Lauren pronounced. I think your team just want to congratulate us. Yes, let her talk, the bride's father said confidently. Paul fell silent because it was not right to quarrel on such a day. Alice continued talking. Thank you, Lauren. You are a wonderful person. I'm sorry you decided to marry Paul, a man who ruined his wife's business, and now he's selling drugs, and even hiding them right in this restaurant. What the hell? The groom shouted, looking at the bride's father with eyes full of fear. What the hell are you talking about? Ignoring his rudeness, Alice continued. Paul, there's something else I want to say. Miracles happen. Someone has risen from the dead and would like to see you. She pointed with her hand to a woman in the dark corner. Paul looked at her with horror. The woman stepped out of the darkness and said, Hello, my love. It was Kathleen, and she was alive and well. She was standing in the middle of the restaurant, looking the same as before the accident, as if she hadn't disappeared for months. Paul couldn't stand on his feet any longer and abruptly sat down in his chair. But how is that possible? He repeated. All the guests fell silent, not understanding what was going on. The bride was shocked and couldn't say anything. This silence was interrupted by the groom's hoarse voice. Is it you? Is it really you? Yes, Paul, it's me, Kathleen said with a grin. Didn't you expect to see me after you deliberately damaged the brakes on my car? You have no evidence, the guy said nervously, turning pale. You are wrong, she said calmly. and looked back. Police officers entered the restaurant and handcuffed the groom's hands. The guests began to get nervous, and some women shrieked fearfully. The bride and her father ran up to the police officers, trying to understand the situation. "What's going on here? Can someone explain?" The bride's father nervously shouted. At that moment, an investigator entered the restaurant and showed an arrest and search warrant to Paul. "You are charged with attempted murder and possession and distribution of drugs in a significant amount." Kathleen was standing there silently and watching everything that was going on. She still couldn't believe what had happened to her. Kathleen grew up without a mom, but her dad gave her the best of everything. He was a handsome and successful man. He had many short-term romances with different girls, but he never brought anyone home, and he never formally introduced them to his daughter. He lived by his own principles and rules, and didn't tolerate anyone telling him anything he didn't want to. And he never told his daughter about her mom. Although she had died long ago, he was willing to do anything for his daughter. Kathleen attended the best school in the city and wasn't a student. At school, she made friends with a modest boy, Nick, who walked her home until graduation and always looked at her with admiration. Although he never once confessed his feelings for her, the girl treated him as a loyal friend, and she couldn't even imagine how much he liked her. Only after the prom, seeing Kathleen off to a foreign university, where her father had sent her to study the peculiarities of modern economics, Nick timidly confessed his love to her. Kathleen was a little surprised, smiled, and gave the guy a friendly hug. They both felt awkward and had hardly spoken to each other since then. The girl studied abroad with pleasure, but often thought about her native city. She missed her dad a lot and was ready to go home at any minute. That's when she and Daddy had their first and last argument. When Kathleen decided to move back home after graduation, her dad was against it. She couldn't stay there any longer. She didn't like living away from home. Her dad wanted her to stay in a better country with more opportunities. He thought it would be better for her. But Kathleen didn't want anyone else to make decisions for her. She came, put her international diploma on her father's desk, and announced that she wanted to live here with him. Seeing this determination, the man began to treat his daughter differently, and he finally calmed down when his daughter agreed to run his business, the best restaurant in the city. That's when Kathleen met Paul. It seemed to her that they met by chance. The tall, blonde-haired guy tried to charm his chosen one in all possible ways. He was nice and sweet, and quickly won the girl's heart. But now she realized that she completely didn't know Paul either before the wedding, or after living with him for a while. He always put on different masks and pretended to be a different type of person in order to make everyone like him. Back then, the girl was surprised at how many common interests they had in music, books, and movies. "It's not a coincidence," she thought. "Our meeting is not accidental. Heaven sent him to me. Paul is exactly the person with whom I have to spend my whole life." By that time, Kathleen's dad was already very ill and didn't hide his desire to find a decent husband for his daughter so that he wouldn't have to worry about her future anymore. Of course, Paul seemed like a worthy candidate. After learning about his daughter's upcoming wedding, the man immediately relaxed and stopped fighting for his life. And very soon he passed away. After her father's death, Kathleen could not get used to the fact that he was no longer there for her. In the past, she had always been able to visit or call her dad at any time, to share her joyful news or, on the contrary, to tell about her worries, or just to hear his loving voice. Daddy always had time to talk to his daughter. After waiting a few months, Paul began to persuade Kathleen to get married officially, saying that it was what her dad wanted. The girl agreed, and they registered their marriage, without throwing a wedding party. Kathleen began to spend a lot of time at work. She wanted to make her father's restaurant even better, so that her father would watch her from heaven and be proud of her. The girl also planned to open 2 more restaurants. She always hoped for her husband's support in developing this business, and she asked him several times to join the family business as well. But after the wedding, Paul has changed a lot. and only began to waste his wife's money. Her friends constantly told her that her husband was having fun with other girls. At first, Kathleen was very upset, but then she was mad at herself for making the wrong choice. When the girl finally saw her husband drunk, having fun with some girls, she decided to divorce him and immediately told him about it. Everything changed the day Kathleen drove to a new vendor out of the city. The memory of that terrible accident made her shudder. All she could remember was hitting the brake pedal as she turned onto the bridge and realizing that the braking system had failed. She pressed the brake with all her might, but in vain. Kathleen was unable to control the car, and the car began to drift down the sharp slope to the river. The girl looked with horror at the irreversibly approaching edge of the cliff. Her whole body stiffened with fear, and she couldn't move. Well, this is it, the girl thought. The girl hit her head on the steering wheel and lost consciousness for a moment. She woke up from the intense pain when she was already in the river. The car was quickly filling with water, and Kathleen, not realizing her own actions, pulled the car door, and it opened. She managed to get out of the car, which immediately went to the bottom of the river. The current of the river picked up and swirled the unlucky girl. The panic and fear of drowning made her fight for her life. She tried to swim with her last strength, but she didn't realize what she was doing. She didn't remember how long she had been floating down the river. But she only came to her senses when someone shook her by the shoulder, trying to talk to her. She felt intense pain all over her body. Kathleen was wet and cold. She moaned, but her voice was weak and hoarse. Opening her eyes, she saw a girl's face in front of her that looked familiar. Looking around, she realized she was lying on the riverbank, in wet clothes. "Are you all right?" the strange girl asked, and leaned over her, peering into her eyes. "Everything really hurts," Kathleen whispered with shaky lips. She had a severe headache and felt like everything in her chest was fractured. She was also shaking, for it was getting unbearably cold outside. "My name is Alice. And yours?" the girl introduced herself. "Kathleen," the girl replied quietly, and suddenly asked, "Your face looks familiar. Do we know each other?" Alice shrugged uncertainly and asked, "What happened to you? Can you work?" But noticing that the rescued girl was shaking, she hurried to get help. In a couple of minutes, she brought a neighbor, a big man with stubble on his broad face, who easily picked Kathleen up in his arms and carried her to a small house. Alice took off Kathleen's wet clothes and put her on a wooden bed with a soft mattress and blanket. Kathleen watched her savior through half-open eyelids and couldn't remember where she had seen her before. It was strange, but Alice was thinking the same thing. It seemed to Alice that she and Kathleen knew each other. Passing by a large mirror on the wall, she suddenly stopped and looked at her reflection. Suddenly she realized where this incomprehensible feeling came from. It was just that Kathleen looked a lot like Alice. Once in the soft bed, the rescued girl felt warm and cozy. Her pain subsided, and she fell asleep. But as soon as she fell asleep, she had a nightmare of falling endlessly into the river, drowning, and trying to swim to shore. Through the dream, she heard a quiet conversation. "Mrs. Parker, will she survive? Maybe we should call a doctor," a familiar voice asked worriedly. "If you want to call a doctor," the second person replied grudgingly, "then why did you call me?" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I'm very worried about her. She is very pale and has been feverish for hours." Kathleen opened her eyes uneasily and saw that it was already dark outside the window. Mrs. Parker turned out to be a skinny old granny, wearing a clean and neat white shawl on her head and looking like she had just come back from church. Apparently, she was the local witch doctor. Kathleen didn't trust alternative medicine, but she liked this nice granny. She smelled like lavender and a bouquet of wild flowers. Mrs. Parker moved her wrinkled, narrow palms over Kathleen's body and then examined her chest and head. And the girl felt severe pain. "Everything is clear to me. The girl's chest and head are badly bruised, but there is no fracture. In the evening I will bring you some herbs," she said to Alice. "Brew them for her. and apply this herbal ointment to the bruises. Don't worry, she will recover quickly." Mrs. Parker was silent for a moment, then frowned and said in a puzzled tone, "I actually feel something else." She looked at Alice and commanded her firmly, "Give me your hand, Alice." The girl held out her hand in surprise. Granny took Alice's hand and Kathleen's hand and, suddenly, fell silent, then began to stare intently in front of her, muttering something quietly. After sitting like that for about a minute, Kathleen wanted to say something, thinking that Granny had fallen asleep. But Alice looked at her and put her finger to her mouth, showing her to be quiet and not to disturb Mrs. Parker. Finally, a witch doctor came out of her trance and put the girls' palms together. "Do you know you are sisters?" she asked suddenly. The girls looked dumbfounded at Mrs. Parker and then at each other. "What did you say? How is that possible?" Kathleen uttered. Grandma shrugged her shoulders and said, "I see that you are siblings. Twins. You must have been separated when you were babies. I'm never wrong about that. I saw that. They showed me the truth." "Excuse me, who showed you the truth?" Kathleen asked in confusion. "It was shown to me by those above us," Grandma repeated cautiously and pointed her thin finger upward. Everyone fell silent, trying to process the information they had received. Then Kathleen shook her head confidently and said, "No. You just saw that she and I looked alike in some way. Daddy would have told me about it for sure. It's just impossible." "It's possible," Alice suddenly said, looking intently at the rescued girl. Everyone looked at her in surprise, waiting for an explanation. The girl got nervous but still decided to tell everything she knew. Alice and her mother had lived in this small house all their lives. Growing up, the girl began to ask questions about her daddy, but her mom got upset by such questions and only said that her daddy just left them and went away. Her mom worked as a school teacher, and all the children hated her. The woman treated her students and her daughter Alice harshly. The students didn't even hide their hostility to the gloomy teacher. It hurt the girl to hear all the terrible words that everyone said about her mom at school. But the girl still loved her mother and knew for sure that her mom loved her too. She just never spoiled her daughter and was always strict with her. But Alice believed that this upbringing helped her become a good person. The girl graduated from high school with honors and, like her mother, entered a pedagogical university. However, the girl was not like her mother. She had a completely different personality, which helped her to develop a completely different attitude towards children. Due to this, she argued with her mother numerous times, but still continued to practice her own teaching method, considering it to be more effective. Unfortunately, Mom's excessive frankness was sometimes inappropriate. Once, she went to the city and missed the train, so she had to wait for the last train, which was departing from the station almost at night. Witnesses said that the woman started scolding some drunken group of guys at the train station, so they beat her up and ran away. Alice still remembers the day she came to the hospital and walked into her mother's room. At first, she couldn't even recognize her, and then she cried at her bedside for a long time. Her mom's face was completely blue from bruises, and her right arm and collarbone were fractured. But the worst part was that those bastards had succeeded in taking away her faith in truth and kindness. The woman just didn't want to live in this world anymore and felt that she would die soon. Before her death, Alice's mom told the truth about her dad. Her parents met when they were very young and immediately fell in love with each other. A passionate romance quickly ended in marriage. People around them couldn't understand how two people with such a stubborn spirit and bad temper decided to start a family. They tried to live together and even were happy for a while. When the twins were born, Dad decided it was time to start a family business. He had ambitious plans, but he didn't want to stay in a small town, as there were no business opportunities there. Unfortunately, he failed to persuade his wife to start a new life in a big city. She decided to stay and work at the local school. No arguments, persuasions, or ultimatums could change her mind. Over time, Husband and wife completely ceased to understand each other. They began to quarrel often and stopped talking to each other. But the real crisis in the family occurred when the 2-year-old girls accidentally poured ink into the drawer with documents on the desk. The parents, seeing that all the documents were irretrievably damaged, reacted differently. Their mother wanted to punish the girls, but the father was against it, trying to prove to her that they were too young and didn't understand what they did. But the woman stubbornly insisted and shouted that she was an experienced teacher and knew how to bring up children and could solve this issue without him. The conflict was getting worse and worse, and mutual reproaches began between the spouses from both sides. "My children don't need a father like you. What can you teach them, loser?" the wife shouted angrily. The man could not tolerate these hurtful words. "All right," he shouted. "If you really feel that way, I'm taking one daughter and leaving you. Let's see who raises a better daughter." "All right, then go away. Do you think I'll cry and beg you to stay? We'll be fine without you," Mom shouted. Eventually, Daddy took Kathleen with him, simply because Kathleen loved to spend time with Daddy and sit on his lap. Meanwhile, Alice spent more time with Mommy, so she stayed with Mom. Thus the stupid behavior of stubborn parents separated the sisters. Alice could not believe her ears, but she didn't accuse her mom and didn't ask any questions, as Mom was in a very bad condition. For the first time in her life, Alice saw tears in her mom's eyes. Soon, Mom passed away. It was very hard for the girl to survive the loss of a loved one, but now she thought about her dad and sister all the time. Alice had even tried to find them, but after the divorce, her mother had changed her and her daughter's last name and never had time to give any information about her father. Kathleen listened to Alice in silence and looked intently at her sister. She finally realized what it was that had tormented her all her life. It was the feeling of something missing, something with which she still had a close connection. Her sister. It was hard to believe this incredible story. How could their parents have made such a terrible mistake when they were young? And more importantly, what did they do it for? To prove something to each other. After all, in the end, so many people suffered because of such a stupid act. These thoughts finally drained Kathleen of her strength. She closed her eyes and rested her head on the pillow. Right now, something else was plaguing her. Kathleen did not doubt that her husband had set up the accident. The day before the accident, he told her that his car was in a car repair shop and he'd taken her car to go somewhere. When Paul came home that night, he was very tense and tried not to look at Kathleen. But what should she do next? How can she prove that he was the one who did it? She couldn't go home now. It was dangerous. Thinking about it all the time, the girl didn't notice when she fell asleep. Suddenly, Kathleen felt something heavy, but very warm and soft on her chest. Without opening her eyes, she reached out her hand to free herself from the weight. But when she felt a big fluffy living creature, she immediately took her hand away and opened her eyes. She saw the huge, sparkling green eyes of a cat nestled on her chest in front of her face. The red cat looked at her with genuine surprise, not understanding why the girl was so scared of her. Then Alice's voice came from the kitchen. "Luna, get away from Kathleen. Come here, it's time for breakfast." The cat slowly stretched and headed for the kitchen, wagging her tail. A smiling Alice entered the room and, wiping her hands with a towel, asked, "So, how are you doing? Sorry, I didn't see that Luna was bothering you. But it's good that she was resting on your chest. Some people say cats can heal." Kathleen moved and realized that her head and chest were actually hurting less than before. Maybe it was the herbal potion from Mrs. Parker that she drank before bed. Or maybe it was the merit of Luna, who was lying on her chest. In any case, the rescued girl managed to get out of bed on her own. Alice, carefully supporting the girl, took her to the bathroom and then helped her sit down in the comfortable armchair in the kitchen where their mother liked to rest. She often spent evenings in that armchair reviewing students' homework. Alice had already made pancakes and brewed tea. Sitting across from each other, The girls had breakfast, not knowing how to start a conversation. Yesterday, they didn't have a chance to talk, but today, they didn't know what to say. And then a cat approached them and began to rub its side affectionately against one girl, then against the other, as if pushing them to start a conversation. They laughed, and then looking at each other, realized they were thinking the same thing. "Luna recognized you," Alice said, looking at Kathleen tenderly. "Actually, she always hides from strangers, but she doesn't hide from you. So that means you are indeed my sister." Kathleen smiled and replied, "I'm happy that I have a sister now." They curiously looked at each other's facial features, noticing that they had a lot in common. A new feeling, unavailable to them before, encouraged the girls. They were happy that now they had one more family member who would not betray them and who would always support them. Kathleen told her sister about her life and explained that she suspected her husband in the accident. Alice frowned and shook her head sadly. "What a sneaky man. What are you going to do next? Maybe we should follow him somehow." "No, I can't do that. He'll recognize me right away," Kathleen replied with a heavy sigh. "But I can do it," Alice suggested, and noticing her sister's incredulous look, she continued, "Why not? It's break time at school now, so I have some time official. I'll put on some old clothes and pretend to be a homeless girl. I can also stick a pillow on my belly so everyone will think I'm pregnant." Kathleen didn't want to agree to such an idea. She was afraid her sister would be in danger, but there was no other plan. 3 weeks later, Alice finally managed to talk her into it. After that, they developed a plan. Alice had to secretly keep an eye on the restaurant, pretending to be a homeless girl. But unexpectedly, thanks to Paul, she got a chance to spy on Kathleen's husband inside the restaurant by getting a job there. When Alice returned home from her new job, she happily shared all the details of her day. But Kathleen had a different reaction to such news. "You're not going there again," she stated. "Why not? Everything is working out perfectly," her sister asked in surprise. "Alice, I don't know what I can expect from that man or what else he's capable of," Kathleen said, and added quietly, "I don't want anything bad to happen to you." And suddenly tears welled up in her eyes. Alice hugged her sister and said, "Sister, don't worry. Everything will be fine. The main thing is that we are together now." The girls hugged each other and discussed further actions. Suddenly Kathleen thought of her school friend Nick. Some of her former classmates had once said that he was now working as a police investigator, and she finally realized who could really help her. But all her former contacts were lost along with her phone drowned in the river. After all, no one keeps phone numbers on paper anymore. Kathleen was still too weak, and it was not right for her to show up in the city. But her sister quickly managed to find the investigator and asked him to come to a small town and talk to Kathleen. It was unclear from the look on his face whether he was happy about such a request or not. But he rushed to a small town that same night. "Nick, is that you?" Kathleen exclaimed. She couldn't believe that handsome, broad-shouldered man was the same shy, skinny boy who had walked her home from school years ago. "Yes, that's me." He smiled awkwardly as he stepped closer and took Kathleen's hand. Looking into her eyes, he thought they were even more amazing and attractive than before. His former feelings for the girl flashed into his mind again. Unlike Kathleen, he hadn't stopped watching the former classmate's life over the past few years. He had found out about her wedding almost immediately after the girl had returned from overseas. And after the news of her death, he couldn't come to his senses for months, until Alice came to the police station. Nick and Kathleen talked until late at night. First, they discussed the accident and the plan for the girl's future resurrection. And then they simply recalled their carefree youth. Now the admiring gaze and warm, caring hand of her school friend, gently squeezing her palm, felt differently to the girl. What a silly girl she had been before. She was looking for true love somewhere else, and trusted Paul because of his attractive looks, while the man who really loved her was so close. Nick examined Kathleen's car, which was found far away from the accident site. and Kathleen's suspicions were confirmed. The brake cylinder in the car was deliberately damaged, which caused the brake system to fail. Working in the restaurant, Alice managed to understand what was going on there. The girl, to whom no one was paying attention, found out that Paul had started selling drugs because of the severe shortage of money. And she even managed to find out who was delivering the drugs and when. The dealer turned out to be the very same suspicious stranger who came to see Paul several times a month. The last drug delivery was just before the wedding. Nick had to risk his job to detain Paul at a wedding attended by many officials, but everything went according to plan. After a large amount of white powder was found in the office, Paul confessed to everything he was accused of. Instead of a vacation, he was now facing a long sentence in jail. That's what happens when you try to live a carefree life and start breaking the law. When the two sisters met on the street, they ran towards each other, laughed through their tears, and embraced each other. They hadn't seen each other in months, only communicating by phone. First Kathleen and Nick went on vacation. Then Alice went to another city together with Lionel, who was invited to participate in a TV cooking show. Then they had to solve a lot of work issues, so they couldn't meet. They missed each other so much that they decided to live in the same neighborhood and promised each other they would never be apart again. Hugging her sister, Kathleen suddenly pointed to Alice's belly, peeking out from beneath the open trench coat. "Are you pretending to be a pregnant girl again?" Alice laughed merrily and replied, "No. Now I'm pretending to be a future mom. I had an ultrasound yesterday. We're having twins." Kathleen looked tenderly at her sister, leaned over, and whispered in her ear, "Just make sure they will never part." Alice smiled sadly, realizing what her sister was talking about. She hadn't realized before what a blessing it was to have a sister. It's a special relationship. It is friendship, trustworthiness, support, and love. It can be described by only one most precious word: family. And whatever happens in life, sisters and brothers should always be together.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." "Absolutely right." His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself. This could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.